I can ensure that this is going to be a power-packed, close to about an hour, power-packed 1 hour. And we're going to cover a bunch of things today. We're going to talk about Netflix. Going to talk about data analytics and Power BI, right? Um, so broadly, I think I typically structure my webinar in three sections. First one is my introduction. Second one is diving deep into data analytics. What is data analytics about? And third, actually using the Netflix dataset to through Power BI to get some insights and learn from our data, right? Now, data analytics, as you all know, is super important across companies. Everybody is realizing the importance of data science, data analytics. Um, every company, and why is that? Because every company is collecting a lot of data, right? You cannot even imagine the kind of data that every company is collecting. And this essentially includes, let's say, images, text, record, sounds, basically, videos, lot of stuff. And in order to make sense of that data, they require data analytics, data analysts, product analysts, data science, business analyst, all these roles, which is where you come in and solve this problem for them. Hence, making this role very desired, very highly desired. Right? So that is the role of a data analyst. Um, to also touch upon the data analytics journey aspect, I want to move towards Excel. I want to move to Excel and quickly show you the steps to a data analytics pathway, right? And I will show that to you through this life cycle. So data analytics life cycle, if you see, right, we start with, it's not a one-step task. So the data analytics lifecycle, and I hope everyone can see this screen. The data analytics lifecycle involves first understanding and defining the problem statement. That is step one. And then you actually collect the data, mine the data, let's say from online sources, social media. Maybe you would already be collecting the data in your organization through through a bunch of sources. That is the second aspect. And then we clean the data. This is where a lot of bandwidth of data analysts and data scientists goes, right? Very important step, sometimes underestimated. And fourth step is manipulation. And this is where you manipulate the data, make it more consumable, make it more digestible or usable, right? And then using that data, you would probably build models. If you're talking about machine learning, using the clean data, using the manipulated data or the more structured data, you would now build models on top of it, right? So that is data modeling. And then we talk about data analysis. This is where pivot tables come into picture. You analyze the data, use bunch of tools like Excel for that. And then you talk about visualization. And when you visualize the data, you create all those beautiful charts, graphs, all that stuff, right? And you try to tell a story using that data, right? For example, this is the data set that we are going to use today, right? The Netflix data set. Now, does this 5,000, do these 5,000 rows tell you anything at this moment? Nothing, right? So if you go through this randomly, you will not get any insight, any trend, any pattern, nothing. Frankly, this data is useless for me. If I do not do all these steps, it is not useful for me. I need to maybe analyze, visualize, and story tell using tools like Excel, Power BI. And that is when it will really drive a lot of value for my organization. Right? So which is why it is very important for you to understand this data analytics lifecycle. Right? So that is one thing I wanted to cover before we started the session today. And why we are solving the problem and why we are doing all of this should be very important, should be very clear to you before we actually solve the problem, right? Why are we doing what we are doing? Why am I defining the problem statement? Why am I collecting? Why am I cleaning? Why am I manipulating the data? Right? All those whys you need to thoroughly imbibe. Otherwise, you'll not get interest in it, right? Otherwise, you'll not be interested and you'll not be able to realize what you're doing, why you're doing that, right? Now let's jump to the very interesting aspect of today's session, and that is Netflix. Now, the Netflix dataset that I have today with me, it's very, very unique. It is very interesting. And a lot of movies that we are going to talk about, we are going to see today, and a lot of shows you would easily be able to recognize because this is data from the last 50 odd years, right? Perfect. So let's see. What do we have? Now I have this data with me, about 5,000 rows. Index is the first column. Then I have ID of that movie or show. I have the title, as you can see, Taxi Driver, Bonnie and Clyde, White Christmas, The Queen, right? All these. So these are the titles that I have. And then I have type. Now there is a filter option in Excel, right? I hope everyone can see this. There is a filter option in Excel. I am using that option to just show you what are the types of type. Basically, what are the two types of um titles or contents that I have, right? Movie and show. So I have movies as well as shows in my data set. Let's come to the next. So what are we doing? We are exploring the data. We are just trying to understand what is there in my data set. Next one is description, right? Description, what is the description of the movie or the show? And if you see, this is not very long, but it is like a short description of the movie or the show. And very important is the release year, right? When was this movie or show released? Right? So that is the release year. And then we have something known as age certification. This is basically whether the movie is R rated, PG rated, whether it's an adult movie versus if we talk about shows, let's say TV 14, bunch of things, and TVMA. So there are these age certifications. And then we have runtime, and this is in minutes. What is the duration of the movie or the show? Right. And again, we have a variety here. We have, if you see here, and I hope this is visible. Yeah, if you see here, we have 0 to 235. So this must be a movie, very, very long movie, 235 minutes, right? Close to about 4 hours, right? So that is the runtime. And then we have something known as IMDb ID. So what is IMDb? IMDb is a platform that rates movies and shows, right? It's like a website that has ratings for movies and shows. So that is where we are getting this IMDb ID. So for this movie, what is the ID on IMDb? IMDb is, you can look it up. IMDb is like a website that rates movies and shows where you can go and rate that. And then we have the most important column in this data set is the IMDb score. What is the rating that the movie or the show got? 8 above, for example, is very good. 8, 8.2, 8.3, and so on and so forth. Another important column, which is the last one here, is IMDb votes. So how many votes did this movie or this show get? Right? How many votes did this movie or show get? Uh, that is basically in this case 795,000, right? So 7 lakhs or close to 8 lakhs. All right, so far so good. So what we've done is, first of all, we didn't have a problem statement here. We didn't have anything that we wanted to solve for. I was just demonstrating how does the data look like. But typically in organizations, you would have a problem statement. For example, in this case, maybe which is the movie that performed the best across the last 50 years, right? So that's an example of a problem statement. I got the data already, so I didn't have to collect or mine the data. That was done. I already have clean data. But now I will come to manipulation, modeling, analysis, visualization, and storytelling. These are the things that we are going to cover today, right? Maybe even cleaning. So all these things, if you see, can be done using Power BI. Cleaning, manipulation, modeling, analysis, visualization, and storytelling. And that is what we are going to do now. Let me jump to Power BI. So what am I doing now? I'm getting this data on Power BI. So in Power BI, there's an option to import data, right? And I will just show that to you. So this is Power BI. Hope everyone is able to see this. All right. I hope everyone is able to see this. Let's check once. Perfect. All right. Great. So I think now we should have some idea of the data that we already have, right? So there is this Netflix TV shows and movies sheet that I want to import in Power BI, right? And if you see, this is the exact same sheet that we just saw. Now, what I will do is I will go to something known as transform data. So you can always directly load the data, but in this case, we will just make some basic transformations. And that is, if you remember, that comes in the data manipulation aspect, right? We will just transform the data. And for that, Power BI uses something known as Power Query Editor, right? Power BI uses something known as Power Query Editor, which I'm going to show you just now. What this does is this helps you with cleaning, this helps you with manipulation, this helps you with transforming the data, making it more consumable, making it more rich, or let's say making it more digestible, right? So let me now move to Power Query Editor, and that is this. So this is called Power Query Editor. This is where I can make changes to my data, understand the data. For example, if you see these columns 17, 16, all these columns have been added uh, by Power BI. I don't want these columns. These are anyways null. If you remember, the last column that we had was IMDb votes. Right? So what I will do is I will simply remove columns. Right? I right clicked on that and clicked on remove columns. So this is Power Query, correct? This is Power Query Editor for whoever is asking. And full form of BI is business intelligence. All right. Now this essentially is my data set. What I want to do here is I want to create a new column. I want to get the right mixture of IMDb votes as well as IMDb score. And why is that? Let me tell you the rationale behind it. Now, if you see, some movies would have gotten a very good score, right? Like, for example, 9 or 9.5. But only 50 people voted for that movie. Right? Only 50 people voted for that movie, but the movie got a 9.5 or a 10. Does that make that movie a very good movie? Probably not. Because those 50 people or those 10 people or that one person who voted for the movie might be biased or might not have accurately given the rating, right? Which is why what we need to do is we want to get a column which takes into account both score as well as votes, right? So that is what we want to do. We want to create a column which takes both score and votes into account. For example, a movie with a rating of 8 but with IMDb votes of 1 million is a very good movie because we have a lot of people voting for that movie and we have a lot of people voting well, or let's say voting highly for that movie, right? Rating that movie high. So that ways we want a new column, and for that I will go to this add column tab here and I will go to custom column, right? So there is something known as custom column, and what we need to do here is we need to define, let's say, a new score. So I'm writing this, I'm calling this score. And what is the score? This is simply the IMDb score multiplied by IMDb votes. Right, so I'll not call this score because IMDb score is already there. Maybe I'll call this score into votes simply. Right, so IMDb score multiplied by IMDb votes. These are the columns that I have, score and votes. I want to multiply them. Why? Because I want a column which takes into account both score and votes. There can be other combinations and we can always discuss that. But this is a combination that is very, very suitable. Right, so that is this score into votes. And that is all I wanted to do here. I wanted to create a new column. I could have done this in Excel also, obviously, but our session is on Power BI today, and I want to do everything using Power BI. So this is a new column we've defined. Now I will click on close and apply. Now what will happen is this Power Query editor will actually close, and you will now move to Power BI, proper Power BI, right? You will move to Power BI, and Let's go back there. And now this data is loading basically. Now it has loaded. Let's see. So we have all these columns and we have a new column called score into votes. Right? This is the data that we have in Power BI. This is coming directly from the Excel file that I showed you. And this new column score into votes has come from the new transformation that we did, right? We added a column in Power Query Editor. All right. Now, what do we want to do here? We want to create a dashboard here. We want to answer a few questions. For example, one of the question can be, which is the best movie in the last 50 years? Which is the movie that got the highest rating or the highest scores, or let's say the highest votes in the last 50 years? Which age certification is producing the best movies? Or which release year, release, or essentially which year were the best movies released in? Right. So all this information I want to answer through my data set. And we will draw charts, graphs using this data to answer these questions. Right. Let's see. Now, what I want to do is I typically start with filters, and that is also known as a slicer in um, Power BI. So I would want a slicer for the type. What is the type? Whether it's a movie or a show, right? I want a slicer for that. And I will simply drag and drop. I've dragged type into this field here. And this, if you see, is a filter, right? This is a filter for the type. Now let's come to, I want to see the card. So this is a card visual. I want to see the name of the movie or the show, right? So this is a card that I've created. It simply tells me at this point, it is simply telling me the name of the first movie in my list, right? Alphabetically, the whichever movie comes on top or whichever show comes on top, it is simply showing that to me. Next, I want to see, now again, these are the questions that we are answering. Whenever you create a chart, always first think of the question that you want to answer through that chart. So for example, the question that I want to answer here is, which release year produced the highest rating, right, on average? So let's see. I want to create a bar chart, and on the y-axis, I want to have release year. On the x-axis, I want to have the IMDb score and average IMDb score. Right, so this is the chart that we have here. If you can see here, this year in particular, 1985, here the IMDb score was very high. Average IMDb score was 8. Right, average IMDb score was 8, and I hope everyone is able to follow me. Let's see. If there are any questions, you can always, do we have Power BI in the Excel directly, or do we need to download it? We need to download it. So this is Power BI desktop, right? It is free on Windows. Anyone can download it. Perfect. Now, this is the question that I have answered here. Which year gave me the best movies, or gave me the movies with the best score, right? Movies or shows, both of them. I also want to see, because typically data sets have bias. I want to see how many movies does my data set have across each release year, right? So I want to see that as well. For that, I will create a line chart. On the x-axis, I will keep the release year. And on the y-axis, I want to see the number of movies. How will I get the number of movies? I can take the ID. If you remember, I can take the count of ID. So our ID is basically a unique identifier for each movie or each show. Right? So I will keep the count of ID. I want to keep the distinct count of ID. And this is that. Now, what does this chart tell you? Just write in the chat, what does this chart tell you about my data set? So these are the release years on the x-axis and number of movies in each release year on the y-axis. Let me know if this, what do you think about this chart? What does this tell you? So what is the learning, let's say, or what is the insight you derive from this chart? Okay. Right. So the learning that you have from this chart is that I have a lot of movies after, let's say, 2010, or let's say after 2015. I have a lot of movies, but before that, I have very few movies, and especially before 2000, I have very, very few movies. So in my data set, there is a bias of sorts, right? In terms of the number of movies that are there in each release year, that is very, very variable. That is highly variable. What this means is that I have a lot of movies after 2015 in my data set, but I don't have a lot of movies from, let's say, 1953 to 2000. Right. So there is a bias in the data set, and whenever you present information to your stakeholders, always uh, point out or always call out this factor that, okay, my data set had a lot of movies after 2015, but there's a bias essentially, or let's say there's a lot of movies after 2015 and there were very few movies before 2000. It's always call this out. This will just help the team take better decisions moving forward, right? More informed decisions uh, would be a better word for this. So I just want to keep this chart here only. And we've now started creating a report basically, right? So these are two things. What else? Now, obviously, we want to answer the burning question, and that is which movie performed the best. Now, when we talk about performing the best, we can talk about score, we can talk about votes, and we can talk about both score and votes. Right? And that is what I want to use here. I want to say across movies. So, of course, X axis will have the title. Across movies, which movie performed the best? Right? So, I want to see not the count. Okay, let's see. Score into votes. This is reading it as text. I want to go here and convert the score into votes. So basically, if you see the score into votes here, it is reading this as text, right? It is the format of this column is a text. I want to read this as a decimal number. And I've simply now converted this score into votes into a decimal format. Now what will happen is I can get the total score into votes number for each movie or show. As you can see here, Inception, and I hope this is visible to everyone. I think so. Yes. Inception got the highest uh, product of score and votes, right? Which means that Inception got a lot of votes also and very good scores also, which makes Inception the best movie in my data set, right? So this is definitely something I wanted answered. And I will just place this chart here, right? And if I apply a filter here, everything in my data set will accordingly change. If you see here now, I have movies only, right? I don't have shows here. Or I can select show and everything will change accordingly. So Breaking Bad is the best show. Second best show is Stranger Things. Third is Walking Dead. We talk about movies. Best movie is Inception. Second best is Forrest Gump. Third is Django Unchained. Right? And remember that we've not plotted score only or votes only. We've plotted a multiple product of score and votes. Right? So both factors I've taken into account. All right. So far, so good. Now, what I want to do is I also want to see age certifications. How many movies are there in each age certification? Right. So I will create a heat map. This is called a tree map, basically. So category age certification and number of movies, which I will get through count of ID here, which means that a lot of movies, about 2000 movies, are blank. 2000 movies do not have the age certification. And 548 movies have R rating, PG, so on and so forth. So what this tells me is what is the distribution of age certification in my data set, right? And there is something known as filters here in Power BI. You can apply, let's say, a filter here. I don't want to see the blank age certification. What I will do is I will simply remove the blank. Right? I only want to see the split of the cases where age certification exists, right? It is not blank. Another way to do this would be simply use a donut chart or a pie chart, right? This is a more elegant way to do this. Let's see. So this is telling you the percentage also, which movie got which movie, or let's say which age certification had what number of movies. All right, so far so good. So what I will do is I will just place this chart right next to this and we will move on. I think the last chart that I want to create is, we've talked about age certification, we've talked about IMDb score, votes, we've talked about release year, we've talked about score into votes, but we've not talked about runtime. Now the question again, I always think of it. I always think of the question first, and then the chart answers my question. So what is the question? The question is that which runtime, or let's say, how does the runtime affect the movie, the score of the movie, right? The rating of the movie. So I want to see runtime versus IMDb score. For that, what I will do is I will simply create a line chart here and I will plot runtime on the y-axis and let's say rating, sorry, runtime on the x-axis and rating on the y-axis. And that is IMDb score. What is this telling you? Again, this is my question to you. What does this chart tell you? So I want to see average IMDb score. Yeah, let's see. On the x-axis, I have the runtime in minutes. On the y-axis, I have the average IMDb score. What does this tell you? And I hope to get answers here in the chat. Let's see. What does this chart tell you? Okay, someone is saying for lengthy movies, IMDb score is more. Fair point. But that we cannot generalize. If you see here, there's a dip here, right? And then broadly, we can say this for at least this data. But here we should always keep in mind that how many movies do I have in each bucket? For example, I may only have one or two movies in this bucket, right? I may only have one or two movies in, let's say, above 200 minutes runtime. So we always need to keep the selection bias or the bias in mind. Always keep that in mind. Correct. Lot of interesting learnings I can read here. Data has outliers. Average IMDb score is this. People want to see movies less than 150 minutes. All of these are very valid points. This is helping me build a story, right? So this I will keep here. This is again very, very useful for me. I just want to arrange this properly. Let's see. All right. Now, one last thing I want to add here is the description of the movie, because sometimes you would want to read, let's say, the description as well. So I will just create a card here, right? This is the description. And there is an option to change the size of this also. So I will go here, call out value. I will change the size of this to 20 maybe, or even less, 10. All right. So this is the description of the movie. If you see here, I have a data set, I have a dashboard from a data set. I have a report basically. And this is much, much more meaningful than the data set that I have, which was very raw and we could not learn anything out of it. Right? This is a data set. Now, the only thing that is left for me is making this more beautiful. At this point, it is looking slightly haphazard, haywire, right? Although you know what is the meaning of each chart and you can learn something out of it, you can derive insights from it, you can create a story out of the dashboard, but still it needs to be more presentable. So what I will do now is I will go to visualizations and I will start adding some components and colors, let's say, right, to each chart. For example, one thing that I always like to do is visual border and shadow, like these two things. And we can always change the color of the chart, right? Maybe change the transparency also. And again, visual border, shadow. So what am I doing? I'm simply making this look neater, or let's say more visually appealing. So if we go to format visual, general, and then effects, we have a lot of options. And I'm going to use some of these now. Let's see. So I'm just trying to increase the visual appeal of this dashboard. And you will notice that there's a lot of difference that we will see through this. Let's see. All right. So visual border shadow again, very, very useful. These are like hacks for making your data set more, or let's say making your report more appealing. All right. Let's see. And we are done. Broadly, I think this is the last one. We can always change the transparency from here. And yes, I think this is what I wanted to show you. Broadly, what this does is this makes the person who's looking at your data set will not lose interest. That is one. And second, the story can flow very smoothly if you have a data set that is more visually appealing, right? You would not face problems around people not wanting to see your dashboard, all of that. And yeah, now this, if you see, if you recognize, there's a lot of difference from what we created initially. This is much, much more appealing, right? Perfect. All right. Now this is simply one page. I can use multiple pages here, and using all those pages, I can create a story. So if you remember, the last step in our data science, data analytics life cycle was storytelling. What I need to do is, and that is the last aspect of the discussion also, I want to create a story out of it, and every chart is helping me add to that story. It's like a data point to that story, right? So I have a lot of learnings from these charts, and all those learnings I can condense into one single story that the stakeholders will hear. They will listen to my story from the data set, and then they will take a decision, right? So derive a story from this chart, and then derive actionable insights from that story. Those actionable insights will then inform the decision making of the company, and they will take decisions. For example, a very typical example that I always take is, let's say Google wants to launch an OTT platform. You have a lot of data from, let's say, other companies, or let's say Google's own other product launches. You can describe, or you can show all of that in a dashboard, and you can create a story out of it, and then that story can help inform the decisions of the leadership team or the management team, right? So that's the last aspect of this, and that is data storytelling. If we see all these aspects come together, cleaning, manipulation, analysis, modeling, and visualization and storytelling, that is the entire data analytics lifecycle, right? And that is what I wanted to talk about today. Uh, in particular, we've talked about the Netflix data set. We've talked about how we can learn from it, how we can create a dashboard out of it, and how can we create charts using questions. So I always had questions, and then the answer was given to us through the chart or through the visual that we created. Right. So that was all. I think just before I end, I think there's one message I want to convey to you. We've talked about this. We've discussed the data analytics lifecycle. We've seen an entire end-to-end, almost end-to-end data analytics lifecycle. I want to, I think, give some, let's say, advice here. If you're planning, let's say, a career transition, and this is a question we very frequently get, right? If you're planning a career transition, you need to have a solid roadmap. I struggled a lot because there was no roadmap initially, right? I had to jump to various courses, various online, offline internships, projects, everything, right? Although all that is required, but there needs to be a structure to it, right? You need to have a solid roadmap, especially if you're planning a career transition, because then you don't have the background. It becomes important for you to upskill, right? So you need to save time. It'll save a lot of time if you have the right mindset and the right structure to your planning, to your roadmap, right? So I highly recommend you to always look for such programs where it is complete, first of all, end to end, covers everything, and it is very, very structured. It is like the complete thing that you need, right? It'll help you build your profile from scratch. Many a times such programs are paid, right? For example, Coding Ninjas also has a paid program. Always look at this aspect, that whether it is complete, whether it is structured, are they helping me with expert guidance, right? Are they helping me with mock interviews? Are they helping me with actual skills that are being utilized or that are being tested upon in today's interviews, right? Whenever you sit for placements, whenever you sit for, let's say, job interviews, are the skills tested there in the program? Always look for these things, because this is a question I get very frequently. So always look for this, and this will help you choose the right program. Right? So such paid courses, and there are many paid courses, but I think these are some factors you need to look at. And if that paid course offers you placement assistance as well, I think then there's nothing like it. Then part of your job, which is a huge part of the job search, right? Which is a huge part of your transition. That is the job search. That will become easier if you have placement assistance also in your program. We have time constraint, of course, we cannot cover all the aspects that will help you in your career transition. But I can guarantee that if you invest in, let's say, a paid program, it makes a lot of things easy for you, right? This entire process becomes very, very straightforward. Now you just need to focus on doing whatever is mentioned in the roadmap, right? You don't need to innovate, don't need to think about it, just need to follow it. And yeah, and your success will depend on how well, let's say, you follow it or how closely you follow it, right? So I think that is one thing I wanted to talk about from a career transition point of view.